headlines on this Wednesday afternoon, September 14th. U.S. consumer prices gained 8.3% on-year in August, with the jump in core prices surpassing expectations and sparking fears about significant rate hikes by the Federal Reserve. And in response, the South Korean currency trades well above 1,391 against the US dollar earlier this morning, amid the unsettling US inflation news for the month of August. Also, the country's daily COVID-19 tally rises higher on this Wednesday to well above 93,000 new infections as more testings are conducted following the Chuseok holiday lull. We begin over in the U.S., where consumer prices accelerated faster than expected for the month of August, fueling fears about further rate hikes by the Federal Reserve, even at the risk of a recession to rein in soaring costs. Our Kim Hyo-sun starts us off.
The U.S. Consumer Price Index unexpectedly rose by 8.3% on-year in August. According to data released by the Bureau of Labor Statistics on Tuesday, the core CPI, which excludes volatile food and energy costs, climbed 6.3% from the same month last year. This was a 0.1% increase in overall inflation from July, while core inflation rose 0.6% on month. Pundits had been expecting a decline of 0.1% for overall inflation, with a rise of 0.3% for core inflation. They now believe that the U.S. Central Bank will remain aggressive in its tightening of monetary policy. The inflation report was one of the last pieces of information on inflation that the Fed will see prior to its September meeting, where policymakers are expected to deliver their third consecutive 0.75 percentage point rate hike to curb inflation. Despite concerns that continued rate hikes may tip the country's economy into recession, Fed Chair Jerome Powell stressed last week that he is, quote, strongly committed to bringing inflation down. Following the release of the August inflation report, U.S. stocks fell sharply on Tuesday. The Dow Jones Industrial Average slid nearly 4%, while the S&P 500 and the tech-heavy Nasdaq sank by more than 4 and 5% respectively. Only 5 stocks in the S&P 500 ended the day in positive territory. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
Now, in response to the higher than expected U.S. inflation figures, which in turn are reigniting fears about further interest rate hikes by the Federal Reserve, the South Korean won lost greater ground to the U.S. dollar. During Wednesday's session, the exchange rate crossed the 1,391 mark, reaching 1,395.5 during early morning trade. The last time the local currency surrendered substantially to the dollar was back in March 2009, when it topped 1,422 won in the aftermath of the global financial crisis. The benchmark Kospi also fell below the 2,400 mark earlier during Wednesday's session. Also on the local front, consumers in South Korea looking ahead to further price hikes for grocery items and utility costs in light of global grain and energy shortages. Our Choi Min-jung reports.
People in South Korea have already had a rather expensive Chuseok holiday due to soaring inflation. And now they are bracing for further price hikes.
Prices aren't falling even after Chuseok, so I'm hesitant. I have to think twice before buying anything.
Included on the list of products that are about to become more costly is Nongshim's instant noodles. From Thursday, the price of a 신라면 will rise by around 11%. So instead of paying 53 cents for a serving, people will now have to fork out 59 cents. Nongshim says the price hike is due to increasing prices of grain caused by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. In total, the company is raising the prices of 26 items. Other instant noodle manufacturers like Palto, Otugi, and Samyang are set to follow suit. The same goes for snacks. Orion is raising the price of its signature choco pie for the first time in 9 years. People will now have to pay 43 cents more to buy a box of 12 choco pies. Orion says the hike was inevitable considering the rising price of raw materials. Finance Minister Chu Kyung-ho on Tuesday urged officials to focus on stabilizing people's livelihoods by monitoring price trends after Chuseok. However, pundits say inflationary pressure is bound to get heavier as electricity and gas rates are also expected to jump next month. The inflation rate in August did decline compared to previous months to under 6%. But given the uptick in prices for food products, there are concerns that the rate will not continue on a downward trend. The government has forecast that inflation will hit its peak either at the end of this month or sometime in October. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, with winter approaching, Korea is reassessing its supplies of natural gas amid ongoing geopolitical uncertainties, including Russia's halt of gas flow into Europe. Our Lee Seung-jae explains.
While consumer prices are beginning to settle down after months of increases, the price of natural gas remains very volatile. In the midst of the Ukraine war, Europe has begun securing mass supplies of natural gas ahead of the winter, causing prices to skyrocket 200% over the past year.
We don't know how much longer the Ukraine war will last, and there are uncertain factors in gas and oil prices.
With Russia cutting off gas supplies to Europe, this could further contribute to the rising price of natural gas. And as South Korea is also taking part in Russian sanctions, like the crude oil price cap system, it's highly likely that South Korea's imports of natural gas from Russia could be cut off as well.
If anyone goes against our economic interests, we will not supply anything. No natural gas, no oil, no coal, no gasoline.
In addition, Australia, South Korea's largest importer of natural gas this year, has recently been considering export restrictions, saying that it does not have enough gas for its own use. And this is further raising concerns over a natural gas shortage here. However, the South Korean government maintains that there is no problem in supply and demand, as more than 80% of domestic natural gas imports are long-term contracts. Despite this, public energy companies that are forced to sell raw materials at low prices will inevitably face problems.
It will adversely affect companies like Kogas, and that will be passed on to natural gas prices for cooking and heating for households.
With Kogas having already increased its gas prices by 20%, the government's top priority going into the winter season will be stabilizing the prices for consumers. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
In other news, health authorities have announced well over 93,000 new COVID-19 infections today. The rise in daily tally has been linked to the availability of more screening centers following the Chuseok holiday lull. Despite the uptick in cases, authorities say the country is past the peak of the latest wave and that the daily tally will decline eventually. Critical cases remain on the 500 range, while 60 people lost their lives to the virus over the past 24 hours. Over in LA, it was indeed a beautiful Monday night for the cast and crew of Squid Game as the drama made history at this year's Emmy Awards with a total of 6 wins, including 4 early honors at the Creative Arts Emmy Awards earlier this month. Our culture correspondent Kim Hyun-sung reports.
Squid Game has bagged 2 more wins at the Emmy Awards. Director Hwang Dong-hyuk is bringing home the Outstanding Directing for a Drama Series honor, while lead actor Lee Jung-jae clinched the award for Best Actor in Drama. Director Hwang is the first Korean and first director of a non-English series to win an Emmy title for Best Directing. And Lee Jung-jae wrote history as the first Asian to win an Emmy as the lead actor.
Now I'm looking forward to coming up with lots of ideas and working on them freely so they can be enjoyed by many people all around the world.
The 74th Primetime Emmy Awards kicked off in LA at 6 p.m. Monday local time. At the start of the evening, the cast and crew of Squid Game were waiting for announcements in a total of 6 categories. Jung Woo-yeon, who played Kang Se-byuk, was up for Outstanding Supporting Actress, while actor Park Hae-soo, who played Cho Sang-woo, and Oh Young-soo, who played Oh Il-nam, were both nominated for the Outstanding Supporting Actor. All are to return empty-handed. The show was also nominated for Best Writing and for the Emmy's crown jewel Outstanding Drama Series. But with Monday's wins, Squid Game now has a total of 6 Emmy Awards and 14 nominations. Earlier this month, the show secured the 4 other Emmys during the Primetime Creative Arts Emmy Awards, which honors stellar artistic and technical achievements. And as the first non-English series to win an Emmy, the history-making Squid Game is to return soon, with the director Hwang Dong-hyuk confirming plans for Season 2. Kim Hyun-sung, Arirang News.
And while we wait for that season, my colleague Kim Jung-sil approached a few pundits here to ask them about their thoughts with regard to the universal appeal of Squid Game. Do take a listen.
The hype is real. 6 Emmy Awards. And just a few days earlier, Los Angeles had proclaimed September 17th as Squid Game Day. So we just can't get enough of the show. But why? We asked some experts what they make of Squid Game's success. Associate Professor Hong Kyung-soo of Jeju University said not only is it a really well-made drama, but that it also resonates somehow with the world despite the gap in language and culture.
We can say that the subject matter was very good. I think it gained sympathy from people all over the world because it reflects not only the situation in Korea, but also the global phenomenon of wealth polarization and the harsh reality of the fight for survival among the underprivileged.
Another expert, Assistant Professor An Jin-kyung of Gangnam University, said that Squid Game, while pointing out some realities of life in South Korea, also achieved a level of universality. She added that although the show might have looked very foreign to viewers, it would have resonated with them nonetheless through similarities in cultural background.
I think it's possible some viewers thought, oh wow, we have similar games, as they watched these games that were familiar yet unfamiliar, like the red light, green light game. So I think there are parts that overlap in this way, whether they are games or hobbies that can be enjoyed universally or similar structures in the story.
The experts said that to produce more content like Squid Game will require a deep understanding of human nature. By exploring human nature and human responses to certain universal social problems, content can be created that transcends cultural differences. Kim Jung-sil, Arirang News.
Now, up next, we seek some more perspective on Squid Game's most recent acclaim. And for this, I have Piers Conran joining me live on the line. Piers, it's been a while. Welcome back.
It's been a while. Thanks very much for having me. Good afternoon.
Right, so Squid Game, it's the first non-English language program to secure Emmy recognition. That being said, Piers, what is the significance of this latest feat?
Well, it's quite extraordinary that we've come this far, and this is something that we've sort of gotten used to it at this point, really. I mean, this is sort of the end of the award season for TV. The Emmy kind of caps it off. The show came out a year ago. It was mentioned earlier in the program about the Squid Game Day, which kind of commemorates, a year after the original launch of the show during Chuseok last year. So these are historic awards, of course, for Korean TV personnel getting recognized in the biggest TV award stage in Hollywood. Not to mention Lee Jung-jae also being the first Asian male actor of any description to win in his category for Best Outstanding Lead Actor. And it's impressive, really, that, as I mentioned, this show came out a year ago. And it had an explosive start at the time. It had billions of hours viewed very, very quickly. But it's remained in the public consciousness that whole time, all the way up until this round of Emmy Awards, which means that the voters for the Emmys it was still fresh in their mind. Obviously, they still liked it. This is something we saw a couple of years ago with Parasite at the Academy Awards. And so it's remarkable that we've seen this happen now in the film world and now also in the TV world. So I think this opens the door for other Korean shows to potentially enter the critical conversation in America, though this year we haven't really seen anything else that could potentially repeat that feat. But also significantly, it helps for any show that is a non-English language show. And you look even at Netflix now does its rankings, where you kind of see week by week what's being seen, and they break it down by English and non-English, and the rankings are very high for both. So it's pretty impressive how people are watching global content, not just English language anymore.
Right, and staying with that, Piers, broadly speaking, what are the implications of this international acclaim, so to speak, on Korea's drama industry as a whole going forward, do you think?
That's a good question, and I think a lot of people are wondering what is going to happen. I mean, as I said, we've kind of gotten used to this. The these whether it's Parasite or Squid Game or Minari with Yoon Yo-jung kind of winning major events at pretty much all the major film and TV award shows in America. And we've had all these historic firsts. And what happens now? You can't really win more awards. There's a couple that haven't been claimed, but they're kind of around the same level. And so what do? You have to maintain, and maintaining is not an easy thing because people get excited about with something like Parasite and Squid Game. It's fresh, it's new, for an audience that hasn't seen these things before, but now they have. And are they as likely to award something the second time around when it comes? We'll see. But there's things that are going to change in the industry. We have the Korean content creators have been laying roots in Hollywood for a long time, but more recently they've been more aggressive. They have more purchasing power now, and they own parts of Hollywood production companies, and we'll see what comes of that. But also we see all these talents that are involved in these shows that are now getting their own Hollywood opportunities. Lee Jung-jae, of course, were recently signed on to be the lead of a Star Wars series for Disney Plus, and I believe he's also got some as yet undisclosed role in an upcoming Marvel film. Jung Eun, only her second ever role is as one of the leads of the Alfonso Cuarón Apple TV series Disclaimer. And so watching Korean actors and creators potentially making more stuff within Hollywood directly is another kind of interesting part of the puzzle.
Right, really it is. Pierce, as you mentioned, Lee Jung-jae is bringing home the Emmy Award for lead actor in a drama series, while Hwang Dong-hyuk is doing the same for a director. Do you suppose these awards were largely anticipated? I mean, fans, I'm sure, would scream yes, but what are critics there saying?
Well, certainly people, the observers of the industry, the people who kind of look at what is predicting what's going to win these kind of prizes, they were definitely front runners, no doubt. I think in the case of Hwang Dong-hyuk, he was seen as the front runner to win that prize. I think for people in the American TV industry, it's quite different from the Korean one. And some people were perhaps impressed that Hwang Dong-hyuk, not only did he write and direct the show, these are normally separate duties in the American TV industry, but he also directed every single episode, which is normal in Korean TV and not normal in America. So perhaps that kind of gave him a bit of an edge. And the freshness certainly was part of it. On the acting side, it was kind of a bit more 50-50. I believe that Bob Odenkirk for the sixth season of Better Call Saul, or the first part of the sixth season, was seen as potentially the front runner, and ultimately that show got 0 awards, which I think critics were perhaps a little disappointed by. But just to say of the critics, yes, I wonder exactly how they felt. In the actor category, I think there was some, I think the critics certainly liked Lee Jung-jae a lot, and there's been a lot of praise for him, but it was a very impressive category this year, and maybe some people felt that perhaps he wasn't the one who should have won. Succession, being a big front runner, won the main drama prize. They had 2 actors in the category, and it's possible they might have split their own votes. And Bob Odenkirk is going to be back next year with the second part of the finale of Better Call Saul. Perhaps he'll win it then. So we'll see. But certainly a lot of people are very happy. And it was a very, very tough field this year.
Right. Pierce, out of the 14 nominations, Squid Game won 6, including 4 early honors at the Creative Arts Emmy Awards. For the sake of our viewers who may not be familiar with this early award ceremony, could you tell us a bit about it and its significance?
Sure. Well, the Emmy Awards have been around for a long time now. I believe this was the 74th edition, and so they're very much considered. They're like the Oscars for TV, essentially. They don't get quite the same explosive public recognition as the Oscars. Film still has a bit more of kind of that glitzy appeal, and the Oscars kind of come at the end of a very crowded award season, so they're kind of a culmination. Whereas the Emmys are just one of many awards kind of happen throughout the year. I mean, Squid Game was already starting to win awards 9 months ago or something. There are several other differences. The Oscars are just film, but the Emmys cover, they cover hour-long dramas, they cover half-an-hour comedy shows, they cover limited series and TV movies and reality TV and a bunch of other stuff. And because there's just a sheer number of awards, it gets split into two different events. One of those took place last week, which is, of course, the Creative Arts Emmy Awards, which is more centered on technical awards and a few other things. Squid Game did very well there, winning 4 prizes, including visual effects, Best Stunt Performance, Best Production Design, and the Outstanding Guest Actress Award for Yumi. And those are in addition to this week's main Emmy event prizes for Hwang Dong-hyuk and Lee Jung-jae.
Right, I'd have to agree. All right, Pierce, as always, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts.
My pleasure.
Right, now on that note, we end the first part of the Daily Report. In the second half, we address concerns of a possible twindemic this year here on the local front. Stay with us.
Arirang. What matters?
Welcome back. For the past 2 years, amid the approach of autumn, health experts and media outlets alike have speculated about the possibility of a twindemic, that is a simultaneous onslaught of influenza and COVID-19. For more on the prospects of a twindemic this year, I have Professor David Kwak from Suncheonman University. Professor Kwak, welcome back.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
I also have Professor Son Ho-jun at Seoul National University live on the line. Professor Son, it's a pleasure as always.
Hi, Sunny. It's good to see you again.
Professor Kwak, we'll start here in the studio. Let's start with your prospects of a possible twindemic this year. We've covered this over the past 2 years, each time, this time of the year. What are your thoughts with regard to twindemic?
Right. My prospect actually changes a little bit this year, different from the last 2 years or so. Primarily because we were sort of retrospectively seeing lucky the past 2 years because there was such heavy measurements of social distancing guidelines, and some of the countries around the globe actually completely blocked themselves from the rest of the world to actually keep it contained so that no particular virus was able to spread throughout the nation, also blocking the possibility of twindemic that much further. But this year, as we have seen with our own government, we have downgraded the level of COVID-19 from the primary to the secondary. And also we have sort of loosened ourselves in regards to social mingling and social distancing guidelines and whatnot. So, and also the fact that we have just been through a huge wave of the pandemic, possibly going through the April to March through possibly June of time, exposing ourselves to the weakening of immunity against COVID-19, but also the fact that having not been exposed to influenza virus for the past couple of years or so, I do think that there is a chance that we would possibly see twindemic. And I dearly hope not that we would go through such an experience. But there is also the fact that I see that there's a greater chance of the nation actually going through more of an epidemic with influenza rather than the COVID-19, because with COVID-19 we had such a massive wave of infection and transmission, and almost 90% and plus of the population have been vaccinated quite strongly against COVID-19, and also the fact that we have actually long-lasting immunity, not just primarily from the vaccination in regards to the antibodies, but also the T cells and B cells that still remain in our body that have the memory of immunity against COVID-19. I would hope and think that we would be better protected against COVID-19, hopefully this year and the early parts of the next year, as opposed to influenza, because we had such less exposure to that. I think there will be a greater chance that we might actually see slightly or relatively larger peaks of influenza during the winter, which still sort of permits us to be vulnerable to seeing a twindemic.
Right. And Professor Son, Professor Kwak's opinion about a possible twindemic is also shared by health authorities here. And that being said, though, one theory I understand, known as viral interference, completely rules out the possibility of a twindemic. Do you care to elaborate?
Sure. So I would caution a little bit that theory is a theory, right? And I would be a little bit cautious in saying ruling out. But there are some evidences that support and some evidences that don't support. First of all, the viral interference is sort of known as virus-virus interaction. It's a phenomenon in which two viruses interact within a host. So same person gets infected by two different types of virus, and it affects the outcome of the infection of one or the other. Then the infection of the first virus either it could enhance or reduce the infection and replication of the second virus. So at the population level, there are some examples that supports this, such as in 1960s, and there were polio vaccination campaign that has shown to cut down respiratory infections. When there was a swine flu epidemic in Europe in 2009, there was very low levels of rhinovirus epidemic at the time when it should surge. Also in Gambia, that people have looked at the surge of COVID-19, rhinovirus, and influenza peaks. And in Gambia, there were no social distancing measures, so they naturally showed when these viruses peaked at different points, it's essentially supported that these viral interference may be at play. But at the end of the day, some biological studies have shown that which virus you get infected first is also an issue. So basically, when you get infected by influenza virus, it kind of limits the replication and the immune response for COVID-19. Whereas if you're infected by COVID-19, but later infected by influenza, they would still experience the symptoms and illness of the influenza virus. So ultimately, I think there are not a lot of solid evidence. We're still speculating. And as I mentioned, it's theory, and theory is never perfect in reality. So we should still be very careful, but there are some suggestions that there's not a possibility of twindemic at this time.
Right, I see. And moving forward then, Professor Kwak, countries in the southern hemisphere, including Australia, had a very rough flu season, especially those below the age of 18 were particularly hard hit. How do you explain this reality? I mean, why were the young so much more affected than the adults?
Right. Let me actually begin by noting the importance of what happened in the southern hemisphere that we have to take lessons from. The important part is that the southern hemisphere sort of works as a testing site where we see the efficacy of the vaccinations that we give against influenza, whether or not they match very well against the transmitting virus in Australia, New Zealand, and etc. This year particularly, they've observed that the epidemic of influenza actually started about 2 months earlier than usual. And we're actually comparing ourselves to the average of the past 5 years or so. So this is not exactly us comparing only to the past couple of years where we were completely locked down against COVID-19. So it means that there's a possibility that the influenza this year may actually begin possibly earlier, or may even become more severe in the sense of affecting a greater population. They've actually reached higher peaks during the epidemic in Australia, and they've reached about 200,000 and more patients being admitted or being confirmed of influenza, and many cases of having people admitted to hospital and going to ICUs and whatnot. But also, very, very recently, just back about a week or so, the newest data actually suggests that now they have prematurely also reached lower than average the numbers of influenza infections. So I would have to rather stay neutral about the fact that whether or not we are also going to get as much of the dire consequences of influenza infection. Now, that being said, the main reason we suspect that people under age of 18 are more heavily affected is because also due to exposure differences. As I've mentioned before, with adults who are older than 18, they've had greater time of experiences that might have exposed them to influenza viruses before. So not only through antibody levels, but as I said, with the immunity, we have T cells and B cells that have memories for much longer time against certain types of viruses. Now, people who are younger than 18 obviously have, relatively speaking, much less of the exposure, less of the immunity building against this particular virus, so they might have been affected more heavily because of that, but also the fact that now we're lifting gradually of these social distancing guidelines, and obviously people who are children who are younger than 18 years of age would have much better chance to mingle themselves because they are now starting to going back to schools and they're mingling better, so there might be the social factor too.
Right. And Professor Son, essentially then, perhaps getting a flu vaccination would be one tangible option to staying safe amid the existing threat. That being said, when should we seek to be vaccinated against influenza? And what are some words of advice, perhaps, as amid plans to also launch the bivalent vaccine campaign?
Yeah, so I want to just first clarify that we shouldn't be thinking that getting flu vaccine will protect us from COVID-19 or its variants. Vaccines are very specific to their disease and illnesses. So, and schedules for being vaccinated for flu should not be changed based on whether or not bivalent vaccine is available or whatnot. There's very specific schedules for that, and I think we should just follow that schedule. There's also studies that have shown that co-administration with COVID vaccines, with flu and other vaccines, does not increase the side effects, adverse events. So therefore, in the US, they are recommending that when you are scheduled to be vaccinated for flu, and at the same time, that's also the time that you get boosted, either with the new bivalent bivalent vaccines for COVID, that's what they should be doing. But in terms of scheduling and timing of the bivalent vaccine is very specific, at least in the US, that it specifies at least that single booster should be made 2 months after the completion either on the primary vaccination or receipt of the most recent booster dose. And then if you have recently been infected by COVID-19, people should defer getting the bivalent booster shot at least until you recover from the illness. And prefer that the delay of this by 3 months can maximize the potential benefits of the vaccination. So again, the clear message is that if you're scheduled for both of these vaccines at the time, consequentially, you should be vaccinated with both. The timing of the COVID-19 vaccine, the bivalent vaccines, should be based on when you had your first or booster shots or when you have previously experienced the illness.
Right, good to know. Professor Kwak, on the subject of COVID-19, I understand the symptoms of this virus, so to speak, the infection itself, has changed in the course of the pandemic. Do correct me if I'm wrong. I understand digestive difficulties may be the first sign of an infection right now, and symptoms like shortness of breath have become less prevalent as the virus mutates. What are some of the more common symptoms now then?
Well, I would actually like to try not to confuse our viewers at the moment. I still am seeing the majority of people who are being confirmed with the case of COVID-19 are still coming up with respiratory symptoms rather than digestive or gastrointestinal symptoms. From the beginning of the pandemic, even with the original strain of SARS-CoV-2, we had a very diverse symptoms that came out of different people. Among the younger children, we often saw gastrointestinal problems along with the respiratory symptoms, but with also the Omicron variant of SARS-CoV-2, we are still seeing a lot of sore throats. We're still seeing a lot of heavy myalgia, muscle pains, joint pains, and whatnot. A lot of people are still coming up with heavy coughs and shortness of breath. But on top of that, we are also seeing more commonly than before people who are coming up with gastrointestinal symptoms. So let's not generalize the symptoms, whether it has shifted from it being more respiratory to gastrointestinal, but it's still respiratory. But a lot of people are also coming up with gastrointestinal symptoms. So let me put it that way.
Right, understood then. Professor Son, back on the subject of vaccination. Over in the US, Dr. Anthony Fauci has spoken about the likelihood of an annual COVID-19 vaccination program. Do you share this outlook?
Sure, I do in some ways share this outlook, and I think we should be looking at why this recommendation was made, and these were based on several important considerations and assumptions. First is obviously there's waning immunity issue, right? So even if you're vaccinated or been infected by COVID, the immunity levels die down, even though there are longer-term memory T and B cells that gives you immune response. And then it also assumes that there is no dramatically different variant than Omicron subvariant that should be rising. And then while we can't rule out the issue of continued rise of the variants, the development of the vaccine finally has caught up so that the currently available bivalent vaccine now covers most of the Omicron variants. So, and with these updated boosters, the bivalent vaccines are in fact designed to add protections for these subvariants of Omicron as well as the original strains. So, so based on all these considerations, we expect that that annual vaccination should be able to prevent us from either the infection, but also towards the experiencing more morbid and serious illness due to COVID-19.
Right, and staying with vaccination, Professor Kwak, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has reportedly spoken about a public COVID-19 vaccination program starting in November. What are your thoughts on the timing of this planned inoculation, especially given our fears about a possible twindemic here in the Northern Hemisphere?
Well, I think it's better than not. Obviously, there have been numerous studies that prove that people who received vaccinations either after or prior to the actual infection were more greatly immunized against SARS-CoV-2. So for those people who are in North Korea to receive inoculation finally would also be additively protected against SARS-CoV-2. So I would applaud their decision to finally go ahead and implement the national level of inoculation. Also, considering the possibility of twindemic, North Korea happens to be one of those countries who block themselves out from the rest of the world from the intrusion of different types of or different variants of COVID-19. So a lot of the population, I presume, would now currently be not immunized, not exposed to both influenza and SARS-CoV-2. So there is, I think, that much greater chance for these countries who have not been exposed to these two particular viruses to finally get them if they start opening up. So I think it'll be wise for them to actually start considering vaccinating themselves for both of the viruses, if not at least one of them. So their decision to finally go ahead and do the vaccinations for COVID-19, I think will be a wise choice at this moment.
Right. And beyond this region, Professor Son, China and India have approved nasal COVID-19 vaccines. Do tell us a bit more about these new preventive alternatives against the pandemic.
Yeah, so we should first note that there are about 100 similar vaccines in development. These vaccines essentially work by triggering the immune response at the point of COVID-19 entry, which is on our nose and mouth, and essentially hopes to stop the virus from entering other cells before it spreads into other cells of the body. So, and these vaccines are developed with the aim to overcome some of the limitations of intramuscular shots, which are the conventional vaccines that we have it in our arms. That has shown some limited immune response at a virus entry site of our body. So scientists so far have shown that these mucosal or nasal vaccines have shown high levels of immune response in our mouth and nose, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it will prevent the infection as well. And ultimately, these studies currently have challenges in measuring the efficacy of the virus, first of all, because we don't, first of all, know what is the appropriate level of antibody response that prevents the infection. And then the second is that we don't have a lot of people who can serve as controls, so who have not experienced COVID-19 at this stage. So we can't really have a counterfactual comparison of those who are vaccinated and not vaccinated, and in terms of measuring the prevention of the infection. But ultimately, I think the goals of these vaccines with COVID-19 has been more or less reducing the disease morbidity and burden by preventing not the infection, but preventing progression to more severe illness. So on that front, these development of these mucosal nasal vaccines are very promising because administration is much easier and simpler. So hopefully more products can be approved so that we have more tools to fight the COVID-19 pandemic.
Right, of course, I'll keep my fingers crossed for that. Professor Son, as always, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts. And Professor Kwak here in the studio, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
The city of Suncheon in Jeollanam-do province is bringing back an ambitious exposition that seeks to highlight the splendor and significance of man's natural surroundings. Our Chung Won-ju has details.
The first Suncheonman International Garden Expo was held back in 2013. A groundbreaking event for the city of Suncheon, Jeollanam-do province to promote itself as the ecological capital of South Korea. Almost 4.4 million people visited the city at the time when Suncheon had a population of less than 300,000. A decade later, the Suncheonman International Garden Expo is returning, and Suncheon is looking to make it even better.
First, the National Garden will be completely renewed. Second, we will show how the Dongcheon River and Korea's first water detention pond may be utilized as living space.
The exposition grounds have already been named as Korea's first national garden and as a tourist attraction all year round.
It's a little hot in the middle of the day, but I think it would be nice to come and take a walk with friends or family when it's cooler.
Next year, the exposition will enable visitors to take in the picturesque sunsets of the wetlands, coastal and suburban gardens, and some wildlife like hooded cranes, which are a common sight in Suncheon. The exposition also aims to create business opportunities for the landscaping industry, as well as local traders who can set up stalls at the Suncheon Bay Garden Market.
The garden market is a cultural and sales venue where people can sell, buy, and enjoy everything from trees and more in one place.
Above all, the city hopes to create a garden road where the city itself serves as a garden.
Suncheon Bay, the garden exposition site we are currently making, and Jeollanam-do province are all agricultural sites. We hope to combine landscape and agriculture to create an area that has never been seen before in the country, and even perhaps the whole world.
The Jeollanam-do province local government and the Korea Forest Service will fully support the upcoming Garden Expo. It will be held for 6 months starting from April 22nd next year. 정은주, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, back here in Seoul, the capital city is playing host to its annual Architecture Festival starting today. On display are photos and videos of work that is, from the winners of this year's Seoul Architecture Award, which honors professional architects and others who've contributed to the city's architectural culture and building technology. Also on the agenda is a symposium with award-winning architects and a tour with related experts. The event runs through Sunday at the Seoul Hall of Urbanism and Architecture across from City Hall. Those interested can register free of charge on the official website.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. In the UK, the Queen's coffin has arrived at Buckingham Palace. Following her lie at rest in Scotland, the body of Queen Elizabeth II has been taken to London. The state hearse passed through the gates of Buckingham Palace on Tuesday evening, local time. Moving forward, the body of the UK's longest reigning monarch will be moved from the palace to Westminster Hall during a ceremonial procession on Wednesday. Starting at 2:22 p.m, the coffin will take a roughly 40-minute journey, marked by 1-minute interval gunfire and viewing areas for spectators. At Westminster Hall, a 4-day lie-in state period from Wednesday 5 p.m. to Monday 6:30 a.m. will allow the general public to pay their respects to the late Queen. After closing, the official funeral will take place the same day at Westminster Abbey. The funeral will bring a national 10-day period of mourning to a close. Twitter shareholders have approved Elon Musk's $44 billion buyout for the social media platform. The decision followed a vote on Tuesday, which now gives the company clearance to pursue the Tesla CEO in court to push through the deal he made to buy the company in April. In May, Musk did a U-turn, saying he had been misled over the number of spam and bot accounts on the site. The two sides are due to meet in court next month, where a judge will determine whether to enforce the deal or not. Meanwhile, on the same day, Twitter's former head of security, Peter Zatko, testified before the U.S. Senate, where he accused Twitter of, quote, misleading the public over security standards. Zatko also said Twitter knowingly added Indian intelligence agents to its list of employees, as well as at least one Chinese agent. Kenya has a new president following the swearing-in of William Ruto. In an official ceremony in the capital Nairobi on Tuesday, the self-proclaimed hustler was sworn in. This follows a close election win against opposition candidate Raila Odinga, where Ruto took 50.5% of the vote and his opponent took 48.8%. The election results were contested by Odinga, but Kenya's Supreme Court ruled last week that the election was free and fair. Kenya's new leader will need to tackle an economic crisis marked by surging fuel and food costs, as well as high unemployment. And in our final story, the godfather of France's new wave cinema scene, Jean-Luc Godard, died on Tuesday. The legendary filmmaker was 91. According to a family representative, Godard died by assisted suicide at his home in Switzerland, where the procedure is legal. The director made the choice after suffering multiple serious illnesses. The French-Swiss director was a key figure in the Nouvelle Vague, or New Wave, the movement that revolutionized cinema in the late 1950s and 60s. His works influenced many Hollywood big names, including Martin Scorsese and Quentin Tarantino. Godard had more than 100 films to his name, with his most recent work, The Image Book, released in 2018. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. Dark and gray skies in the capital is turning brighter afternoon. However, Jeju Island could see 10 to 40 millimeters of rainfall into Friday. And due to the indirect effect of Typhoon Muifa, the island and the south coast are under a strong wind advisory today. And now the Korean peninsula needs to brace for the 14th typhoon of the season, Nanmadol. The tropical depression is moving northward over waters east-southeast of Okinawa, and it could arrive in waters southeast of Seogwipo City on Jeju by dawn next Monday. Well, we are already into mid-September, but the air in the afternoon is still not very much like autumn. In fact, most parts will be seeing highs that are 2 to 4 degrees higher than seasonal norms today. Seoul, Daegu, and Busan will be going up to 28 degrees. Gwangju will be topping out at 31 degrees Celsius. Well, the warm trend continues through the rest of the week and into the weekend, while Jeju Island will be seeing rain throughout the week. With that, here's a look at the weather conditions around the globe. Right, and that ends this edition of the Daily Report. Thank you for watching. Do join us again same time tomorrow. That is Thursday for more coverage.